Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I am doing well, and you and I have been following what's been going on in Asia right now. The president's over there saving us from the next war or whatever he's supposed to be doing. But I don't know. I thought by now they'd be inviting you to go along as an advisor. I didn't hold my breath. I didn't think they were going to call me. But anyway, I don't think it's all, a terrible thing was happening there. What's going to come of it is the big question. It's important. And Trump is so far under his best behavior, hasn't done too much harm. There's lots of talk about what this is all about. But, I sort of think these trips are important. That shows, at least talking to people rather than just dropping bombs on people. But I think not much coming out of them. I think it's maybe they go, if they're in trouble at home, they make foreign trips, and then they have to talk to their base. But that's not just American ideas and spirit of talking to a base and satisfying the hawks and versus the doves. But I think that exists probably in all countries. I imagine the president of South Korea has to talk to his hawkish groups and be tough with North Korea. At the same time, he might do something different. And they get together like this, and I think it's a lot of spin, it's propaganda, but also pretty important. So, and we see the potential of Trump speaking with Putin. I think that's important. But what about his hint he might talk to Un? That's where I have my doubts, but that can't be harmful, unless they get into a fist fight.
It would almost be, I guess, it's a cliche, but a Nixon goes to China moment if after all of the bullying, the name calling, back and forth between Trump and Kim Jong-un, if they did actually sit down, he even said he'd be open to a meeting. He thought it was a little premature, but he'd be open for a meeting. But of course, this is just 2 weeks after he told Tillerson, you're wasting your time trying to talk to these people. And then we find out that they've actually been quietly talking to them for a few months. So, it's up in the air. Who knows what this flavor of the week is?
There's sometimes we like to remind Trump of what he said in the primary, especially when he says, "Oh, I'm going to have the Fed audit it." But then other times when he said good things about being friends with Russia and then backing away from that. So yes, he can switch his position all he wants as long as he comes in the direction of less intervention, and a more peaceful approach. But there's been a lot of concern about what's happening in the Far East, and right now we have a rising power, China. I think they seem to be very calm and diplomatic about it, and not doing a lot of demagoguing, and they're not threatening anything. Where we seem to do more of that. But China seems like, in time, they become out on the winning side of all this, because a lot of people see us as, although we are the power of the world and we have our empire, we have the weapons and we have the money, but we also, guess what we have that China doesn't have? A lot of debt. Everything we have is dependent on debt, and we've gotten ourselves in deep trouble mainly because the world accepts us as the powerhouse and they accept our money. But that's the whole thing that's holding the system together right now.
Yeah, and the APEC conference, and that's the reason for the travel. And he's going to several other countries, including Philippines, China, and Vietnam, obviously where the summit is. But the point of this is trade, so that's the ostensible purpose of the meeting. I think the question is, how much is he going to try to strong-arm these countries? Remember back in March, he issued an executive order telling the different government agencies to come up with the countries where we have the worst trade deficit with. So is he going to be armed with this? He's going to twist some arms saying you got to buy more of our stuff. How's that going to work is the question.
And of course that's important, but I did get a bit of a charge out of the fact that in Vietnam they're going to have an Asian Pacific Economic Cooperative. And they're going to sit down and talk about it. And I keep thinking, which I've said many times, we have won more in peace than we ever did in war. And I think about those wasteful years that the French and the Americans killed, and Americans died. And now we travel over there and we're going to have talk about trade. I guess each side's going to look for an advantage for their own country, but it's just too bad that they all don't become non-interventionists and free traders and say, look, we're not going to have trade wars, and we're not going to have tariffs placed on anybody, and we're not going to have manipulation of currencies. That would be great. But anyway, I think this is good, and that might be where Trump will meet Putin and talk to him in Vietnam, which is just a bit of irony, you know. Ironic. So in my lifetime, certainly, you know, and me being in the military at the time, it's such a, you know, progress, even, you know, with China back then, you know, when I was in high school, you know, we were fighting and killing each other with the Chinese. It was just a horrible, horrible mess.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, as the whole Putin narrative in the U.S. is fortunately falling apart, the idea that somehow they took out a couple Facebook ads and fixed the election is falling apart. You know, there's a real downside to him meeting, at least for his political opponents. They won't focus on the things that we're trying to focus on, which is trade, strong arming, military talk. But sadly, it seems in terms of trade, one of the only things we really are able to export is military stuff. And, you know, this morning he had a press conference with Prime Minister Abe of Japan, and he was bragging. He said, Japan's going to purchase massive amounts of military equipment from us, you know. And I was wondering, it got me wondering, is he the president or is he the salesman for the military-industrial complex?
You know, the South Koreans, we've always made the case that maybe if we had a slightly stronger leader in South Korea. But you know, sometimes strength and weakness are arbitrary terms, because if you're strong, you're a militarist. But sometimes it takes strength to be non-militaristic. And in a way, you know, the president and the people of South Korea now are asking for a little bit more diplomacy with North Korea. And all this talk about possible invasion to get rid of a nuclear, you know, power like North Korea, who's going to suffer the most? It'll be the South Koreans. And yet, on this trip, thousands of South Koreans turned out to demonstrate for peace. Now that's a good image. That's letting the people speak out, but that can be reversed so quickly with an incident. You know, somebody getting killed or some ship being sunk or who knows what. All of a sudden, nationalism sprouts up again, and it's not always by an accident. Yeah. Sometimes there's contrived events that galvanize the people to hate the enemy, and you can't fight an enemy unless you hate him. But right now, this trip doesn't seem to be involved in expressing a lot of hate, and the fact that we're fighting over the Russian influence, you know, in this country. How much did they control? Did they really control the election? At the same time, it looks like Trump and Putin will be sitting down and talking, and hopefully that'll send a good message.
Hopefully so. And you mentioned South Korea. You know, the South Koreans elected a leader in President Moon who said, I want to return to the sunshine policy of talking with North Korea. I want to step back from the war footing. But he hasn't really been able to assert himself that much, as you pointed out. But there was this demonstration, which is very important for them to hold their elected leaders' feet to the fire. But this is a quote that one of the demonstrators, when he was on stage, said, and I thought it was really good. I think this captures the essence of what's happening. Here's their complaint. He told the crowd, Trump and Kim are using the current military standoff for their own personal gain, while we South Koreans are trembling with fear of war. You know?
I think there it is. They're speaking out. We need to hear more of that. You know, I think the American people, if they're well informed, they're going to understand why we shouldn't be bullying the people over there and dictating to them. But that remains to be seen. But there's a recent letter written that if you look at it superficially, you might say, oh, the Pentagon has called for the invasion of troops in North Korea to get rid of a nuclear site. And yet that's not what the letter said. There may be something in this letter that was written at request of an inquiry by some Democrats. And but they are saying that if you're going to, you can't do it without an invasion. As a matter of fact, there were some things in there that pointed out how big a deal it was. Well, why should that matter? Shouldn't common sense tell you that it would be a disaster for us to all of a sudden invade North Korea, even if somebody said, well, they do have a nuclear site? That wouldn't work. But why this is important, it's in total conflict with Trump's position, at least presently.
Yep.
You know, he says, I think in the campaign, adamant, they will not, I won't let them have it no matter what. But here the Pentagon's comes along, and they, who have a little bit of experience of death and destruction, are saying, you know, and it seemed to be more of an objective approach to show what could happen rather than saying, well, we have to do it, and this is what you have to do, and this is what it's going to cost. It was like, read what they're saying, and then all of a sudden we should be a lot more reluctant to even talk tough about it because it doesn't make any sense.
It did feel like a bit of pushback. You know, they said in the letter, there was an admiral that wrote the letter and said, if we are going to be sure that North Korea does not have a nuclear weapons program, it will require a U.S. ground invasion of North Korea. And of course, that would mean millions of people possibly killed. Seoul is a city of 10 million people, 31 miles from the border. But I think the admiral doing this, the military doing this report, really brings the idea of conflict out from the abstract to the real. This is what really will happen if we move toward war. Millions of people will die. The military will be blamed. Trump will be blamed. He will go down in history. So I think that focuses things. And you see with the propaganda in the U.S., the public opinion is going toward being afraid. 54% in an October NBC News poll believe North Korea is the greatest threat. That's dangerous.
Now, I've sort of painted this as being relatively benign what's going on over there, but how it could be reversed rather quickly is what if there's a false flag and somebody hits a ship or somebody gets killed in the midst of all this and put all the blame on North Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, boom, the whole thing changes overnight. I'm not predicting that. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's those kind of things that reverse things, and we like to bring out, you know, the positive things, whether they're talking about trade and whether Trump is going to talk to UN and talk to Putin. All these things are going in the right direction. Unfortunately, the philosophy behind trade and economic policy is a philosophic thing where people have to learn. But the people in charge now, whether they're in the Congress, we know the people in Congress, they don't understand free markets and sound money and free trade because they all support the other. And these people over here, they're all in some way protectionists. Everybody has to believing that protectionism is the only way you can do well. Not really understanding the marketplace. So, but nevertheless, I think what's going on here hopefully will come out as a strong positive, and it'll be less confrontational because it makes no sense to keep shouting and threatening, and I think we need to drift away from what I accuse our government of endorsing is a foreign policy of two choices. You know, if they're friends with us, we'll give them a lot of money. If they don't do what we tell them, we bomb them. Yeah. As long as they don't have any weapons. You know, if we can talk them out of their weaponry, then we have more in charge. We'll subsidize them, but we can also bomb them. But don't let them get a nuclear weapon, of course, and that's a good goal, but not this way because things haven't gotten better in the Middle East or in Libya or in Syria because of our domination.
Exactly. Well, if I can, this is going to surprise you. I'm going to end on a positive note. We're pretty critical of Trump's foreign policy, and I think for good reason. But here's, I think, one good thing that will happen. The media is speculating. It appears that he's not going to go over there and hector the countries about their human rights records. And that is a little bit of non-interventionism that's very, very helpful because the interventionists use the human rights record as a tool to get humanitarian interventionists involved in military interventions. So I think it's actually a very good sign that he's not going to go over there lecturing other countries about human rights.
Boy, that's a good suggestion. I remember one time on a committee hearing, this subject came up. I'm not sure it was with China, but what it was with another country, where we wanted to punish them for their violations of civil rights on their individuals and how they protect human rights. And I pointed out about 3 or 4 incidents where we weren't doing so well ourselves. And the guy, more or less, the other congressman just sort of threw up his hands and said, touche, you know. He had no argument because we have failed to protect civil rights here in this country, and that's what we should work on. That's what we're responsible for. And I say set a good example, and maybe others will follow us. We've had to set a good example on monetary policy and economic policy and diplomacy and foreign policy. I think that people might say, you know, America is a great place, and maybe there is something like that. Maybe we ought to look at it and follow it. This intimidation that we will spread American greatness by intimidation and weapons and troops and force it on other people, an absolute failure. It's cruel and unusual punishment for other people. It shouldn't be done the way, and since it doesn't work, we should think about improving ourselves, look unto ourselves as a country and as a people to set an example for others. I think that's a much better way to work toward peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.